All right, Discipuli. So I always, I've read these sentences ahead of time. Let's assume that I've read the whole sentence, and I've noticed that I've got a semicolon here and a period here. So two basically separate sentences, but I want to break it down further as I read left to right. This looks like it's its own clause. The commas are helpful. Simulacque, often written as one word or shortened to the one word simulac, is like an as soon as this happened clause. It's like a temporal clause. So it looks like I'm starting off with the main clause, hostes, and they're just being described by the participle superati. Perfect passive participle goes neatly with an ablative. As soon as blah, 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 what did the hostes do? I continue my main clause. Looks like I've got an object and a verb and a couple of prepositional phrases. Going back to this simulacque clause, I've got an object and a verb and a prepositional phrase. I don't see a subject, so that verb is going to have the same subject as the main clause, which is the hostes. So to put that together, the hostes, having been superatied in proilio, and it would make sense if it were like an actual passive, like superatied by so-and-so, but it probably make more sense to say in proilio here. Comma, pausing, as soon as they recovered themselves, or just recovered from their fuga, what did they do? Immediately miserunt id legatos ad Caesarem regarding pax. And then when I get to the second part, obsides with an a's ending could be nominative, could be accusative. I've got a say, which is also accusative. So then I'm like, well, maybe obsides is my nominative and that's my accusative. Or I have two accusatives, because when I get to this next daturos, it's almost certainly a daturos essay. I've got a quae, impair, but I'm like, what's going on with the quae here? Facturos is probably facturos esse, so my quae is probably connecting these like accusative infinitive and accusative infinitives, and it's just this one also happens to have an indirect statement within it. And I confirm that by having a head verb at the end. And they promised that say's got to be the subject of my indirect statement. Whenever I have a say, it's almost certainly the subject of my indirect statement. They promised that they, daturos esse, would give the obsides, new vocab word, plural of obses, that they would give the hostages and that they would facturos esse, that they would do quae imperaset, the things which he had ordered. So I borrowed that quae and moved it in with the facturos esse to show my two indirect statements. All right, so in the next sentence, una, right, that's our una, like together. Cum his legati, so that sounds like that goes together. Again, I've read this whole sentence ahead of time, but I'm looking at things like that's a nice prepositional phrase with that adverb at the beginning, and then my subject and verb. So simple. I can read it left to right. Una cum his legatis comias atrebas venet. I could move, in English, the venet to in front of the comias atrebas, and that would be okay. And then we get a relative clause describing him. And the relative clause could end at the demonstraveram, but demonstraveram further sets you up for like, or it could just be, whom I had demonstrated above, whom I had talked about above, had pointed to above. But it also sets us, so we could end it there, but what we get is a Caesare, ablative in Britanniam, and then a passive, almost certainly an infinitive, because the demonstraveram is also setting us up for an indirect statement, like whom I showed above had been verbed into Britanniam by Caesar, because we didn't read that in Latin, but in the English, earlier in the Latin text, Caesar had talked about this dude before. Hunc, direct object. Illy, subject, and then a navi aggressum is a participle describing our object. We need a verb that links it all together, and we're not going to find it here in this cum clause. The cum clause is going to have its own subject and verb. So back to my hunc object, illy subject. My verb is comprehenderant. So those guys had comprehenderanted this guy, having aggressum'd from the navi. And what else did they do? And they had con ye ceranted him in vincula. In Latin, we saw this in book 1, I think, like to throw someone into chains. We would probably say like put someone in chains, right? And then we'll fill in the cum clause too, like when, ad eos, that goes together. Modo could be an adverb that means only, but here it's got to be the noun that oratoris is going with, because genitives have to be paired with another noun, not a pronoun. Mandata looks like my object, and Caesaris is a genitive going with it, and then my verb and therefore subject is deferet. Like when he was deferreting the mandata of Caesar to them, for this phrase, like in the manner, right, in the modus, right, in the manner of an orator. So he went to them as like an ambassador, and as soon as he got off the ship, they arrested him, right? Tum, proilio facto, lovely ablative absolute, re misserunt, like they did this, right? And what else did they do? They contulerunted, and they petty-way-runted is the structure that should stand out to me as I was reading that sentence, right? Then, proilio facto, like with the battle done, right, they sent him back, and in plus a little gerundive phrase, right, in petenda pace, eius rei, that's genitive going with culpam, and culpam looks like my object, and then we've got another prepositional phrase, and then my verb, right, they like placed the blame of this situation onto the common crowd, right, onto the multitude. And they asked, indirect command, that it be ignoscerated, prepositional phrase, on account of their idiocy. Caesar, subject, with a participle, a nominative participle, that is a deponent verb, so instead of meaning having been verbed, it's going to mean having verbed. And quod here, you could say because, you could probably also get away with translating it as that. Cum clause. And then the thing that Caesar has questus quod. Well, no, I guess not. Yeah. Yeah, that's a fun one. So like, we're going to try our when, since I don't want to give it away, right? Whenever we get a cum clause, which looks like it goes through petiscent, but then when we move past the comma, we see that it actually takes the into licent. So Caesar having questus that, when, since, or although, they petiscented pacem ab se, with legati, ablative absolute, with legatis having been misceased, ultro incontinentem. So like, I would say that it kind of gives it away, like, because you have the two things here, what's separated by a comma, like when they did this, they had done that. It's actually going to make the most sense to say that, like, although they had done this, they had still done this other part, which is object verb. They had brought war sine causa. Okay, so Caesar having questus that, although they had I mean, it doesn't have to be although, but like, although they had petiscented pacem from him, with legatis having been misceased ultro into the continentem, the mainland, even though they did that, well, they did this, right? They had into licented bellum sine causa. So what did Caesar do after that long participial phrase, having questus that? He deexited. That's our main verb with Caesar. He deexited that he, subject, accusative, and then our infinitive, because this is an indirect statement, that he ignoscerade the dative, their imprudentii, and Caesar also imperabulated obsides, seeing that word again. The obsides, of whom illi partem statim dederant, and it's not really a relative clause, it's really just like of whom. I mean, I guess it's a relative clause going through the dederant. Like, no, it's really not. It's like of whom, subject, object, verb. Those guys immediately gave partem, but another partem, ex longinquioribus locis arcesitam, right? participle, having been summoned ex loginquioribus locis. Paucis diebus is an ablative of time, and then an accusative and an infinitive, right? Because this is almost certainly Daturus esse, and then a verb that sets us up for that. The other part, right, they said that they would give, the other part having been arcesitam from farther away places, they said they would give paucis diebus. Meanwhile, suos looks like the object, in goes with agros, and then my verb, which explains this infinitive. Meanwhile, he ordered his guys, sorry, they ordered their guys, my bad, plural, right? They ordered their guys, the British, right, to remigrare into the agros. And the principes subject on all sides, infinitive, maybe I've got an accusative infinitive here, but this verb at the end tells me that it's like, and the principes on all sides began to convenire and to commendare, like to entrust, civitates suas, to Caesari, right? And the principes began to convenire, and they also began to commendare their civitates to Caesari.